Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. This is our 8th installment on what we're calling the Hall of Faith, which would be looking at some Old Testament men and women who exemplify faith. This week we're going to look at Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now these last 7 weeks we've been studying the faith of these Old Testament men and women, choosing which characters by reading Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith. With suffering and backsliding going on among the Hebrew Christians, a focus on faith is needed. Recall that the author begins by describing faith. This is the writer of Hebrews. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. So we can learn some truths about faith from these verses. Faith involves confidence, being sure, that part about being sure. Faith involves conviction, part about being certain. Faith relates to the future, what we hope for. And faith deals with the unseen. So the writer looks at examples of real people of the Old Testament in regards to their living faith, and that's what we're doing. We focused the last few weeks on two of the greats in the Old Testament, Abraham and Sarah. The writer of Hebrews includes many Old Testament men and women. I'm going to show you the list that we had started with. We're going through some of them. We've looked at Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Sarah, and now we come to Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So reading in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. So, 3 men, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. This happens to be Abraham and Sarah's son, grandson, and great-grandson. Last couple of weeks we concentrated on Abraham and Sarah, as I said, and the author did have a lot to say how their faith was demonstrated. God said, go, they went. God said, you will multiply, even in old age, they believed him. God said, kill your son, Abraham was ready to obey. And next week we're going to read about how Moses demonstrated his faith with action. Sandwiched between these two biggies, Abraham and Sarah and Moses, are these 3. Instead of great acts of faith with drama and danger, what do we see that the author is looking at? The author seems to focus on their giving blessings and making requests. But more than that, each of them has faith in the promises God gave. They also, all 3, stuck with their faith to the end. If you'll notice, it says it's obvious with Jacob when he was dying. When he was dying, it says in verse 21. Joseph, it says, his end was near, when his end was near. And Isaac, too, he gave his blessings to Jacob and Esau when he was a blind old man. Something to think back that we read weeks ago. Recall in Hebrews chapter 11, 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. So this didn't just apply to Abraham. It was an inspiration to all these patriarchs. And it's an inspiration to all of us to stick it out. So greater theme for these men, these patriarchs, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, is to look to the future in faith. They each had faith that the promises given to Abraham would be fulfilled for their descendants. Throughout Abraham's life, God promises being a father of nations. God's words were surely passed on from generation to generation. But there was also this bad news, good news promise that God gave. He gave this to Abraham. This was back in Genesis 15. As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. So part of the promise isn't all positive. And they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. Oh, that sounds daunting. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. So these promises from God were part of the faith of these three men, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now let's look at these each. Let's look at each of them. Let's start with Jacob or Isaac. We'll start with Isaac in Hebrews 11. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. In Genesis chapter 27, we get the story of how Jacob got the blessing of the firstborn. I know a lot of you know that story. I won't go into it. Esau was the oldest, but through some deception by both Jacob and his mother, blind Isaac blesses Jacob. And it says in chapter 27, verse 26 in Genesis, this is the blessing. Then his father Isaac said to Jacob, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Now, if you remember the story, Isaac was smelling Jacob, but he thought it was Esau. And then it continues, may God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. God's promise to Abraham was therefore passed to his son Isaac, and now Isaac's son Jacob. The stories of the future, stories that Isaac grew up with, were being passed down. Isaac's eyes were failing, but his spiritual eyes could see the future. Now, it's not such a happy story, but let's look at that verse again from Hebrews. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. There's another son. There's two blessings. There's two sons. After Jacob's deception, Esau asked for a blessing from his father. We read that in verse 36 of chapter 27. Then he asked, that's Esau asked his father Isaac, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, meaning Jacob, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. Isaac is being very prescient. It's all tied in with the promise. And there's not much I can say about Esau's fate. It sounds like a tragic situation. But we'll move on here. Let's now look at the next character. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Okay. In Genesis 48, we see this where Jacob blesses his grandsons. Now Jacob, whose God named Israel, you'll see the word Israel for his name, is on his deathbed. And Joseph has taken his two boys to see him. So in Genesis chapter 48, verse 8, when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, who are these? They are the sons God has given me here, Joseph said to his father. Remember, Joseph is in Egypt. Israel, Jacob, has been living in his homeland. Then Israel said, bring them to me so I may bless them. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too. And now jumping ahead a few verses to where Jacob does give his blessing in verse 15. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly upon the earth. So from grandfather to grandchildren came the blessing for the future. The blessings, the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. After the blessing, Jacob said this in verse 21. Then Israel, Jacob, said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you, as one who is over your brothers, I give the ridge of land I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Okay, that was Jacob's giving his blessing. Next, in Hebrews 11, we come to the specifics about Joseph. Now, we had a long series on Joseph, so we know a lot about Joseph, but here we're concentrating on these words from Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. The Genesis account has this in Genesis chapter 50, verse 24. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's the promise. There's the faith in the promise. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's not where he wanted to be. The future of the promise here is being passed between siblings. The promise to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was still intact. But what about these bones? Carrying Joseph's bones out of Egypt was important to him. Joseph was an Egyptian geographically and occupationally, but he was an Israelite by heritage and where his heart was. He wanted his bones buried with the people connected to the promise, and his wish was granted. We read in Exodus chapter 13, Moses, the writer, talks about what he did with the bones. Moses takes his bones with him out of Egypt. Verse 18 of chapter 13, Exodus. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. Well, that concludes looking at the faith of these three men of the Old Testament. I'm going to put the verses back up. And let me read it one more time. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. And by faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. These were not so much actions of faith taken to show their faith. They were a demonstration of faith in words, keeping God's promise alive. Don't we do the same when we pass on knowledge of God's promises to our children, to our grandchildren, to family members? It's always good to remember to do that. Well, that's where we're going to stop, and we'll continue next week. In the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.